Well, James was a typical 19/20-year-old who loved life, loved his friends, loved sport.
He was a really gutsy kid. He's pretty small, and you know, at that age, of course, there's a huge discrepancy in size because some kids grow big very soon, and some mature much later.
He was always very friendly to everybody. He'd sort of started practicing Buddhism and stuff like that. He had a little shrine in his room and he'd meditate.
And he had a lovely girlfriend who they did a lot together, and there was a mixed netball team that they played in together, and I think they actually won the championship that last season. So he was very happy to get involved in things that were happening around the place. We've actually been quite touched by the number of people who knew him at school who have since contacted us to tell us little things about James. And there was one story from a young man in particular who'd felt a bit ostracised at school, and he wanted the family to know that though a lot of other people didn't talk to him, that James had gone out of his way to spend some time with him and look after him and check that he wasn't feeling too lonely, which I think is pretty special.
It was his birthday, obviously, but I told him to come to this party that I was going to, and he didn't want to come, but he went out with 80. He was going to a mate's gig, Steve's gig, DJ Matic. He was DJing in the city.
They'd gone there, met up with Adrian, and they were just walking down the street.
And it was about 9:30.
Yeah,
maybe,
it was still
10.
light.
Yeah.
Shops were just closing, that sort of thing, not particularly late.
Walked past a girl or something and made a comment, and she responded, and he's probably responded twofold.
People who were walking with the girls didn't hear what was said, and I think they were just a little bit upset by what had happened, and they came across and a bit of a skirmish started.
He got into an argument with the girl's boyfriend, and then, into a fight. And by the sounds of it, it was a really serious fight. After,
some pretty savage blows, James ended up with being unconscious at the scene, or not at the scene. There was a bit of a chase, and they ran down a dead-end alley, and unfortunately there was nowhere for them to go. And James was hit and lost consciousness and fell and hit the back of his head on the road. And at that time he stopped breathing, and he was very fortunate that Adrian was there, who was able to act with unbelievable composure really, and he was able to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and start him breathing and his heart going again.
I got a call from the hospital to tell me about this young man who had a severe injury, and when I come in, and I remember it very well coming in and being aware of who he was and seeing what a terrible injury that he had.
See, what happens is when the brain swells is that it has nowhere to go, so it pushes down on your spinal cord, and if that happens, then you can crush vital bits of your spine that are responsible for breathing and heart, all that sort of thing. So to prevent that happening, they just take the top off your skull so your brain can swell outwards, and that's what happened to James, basically.
With this sort of injury, we see a lot of people with brain injuries, and many of them recover. Some of them die, and a few of them, unfortunately, are left in the sort of twilight zone of where the brain is really not really recovering much at all. But the body is strong enough for the patient to survive, and so the degree of recovery has been very, very slow and really quite very small.
When he came out of hospital, he had a tracheostomy in his throat to help him breathe. He couldn't swallow, but he did very well. He learnt how to swallow, and they were able to take the tracheostomy out. So he maintains his breathing and his swallowing.
Well, he's become more aware of where he is, of his surroundings. He's lifting his head a little bit more. He's showing more emotion than he used to, in that he laughs sometimes, he cries when he's obviously sad.
While he was in intensive care, there were tremendous worries and things from a medical perspective. Now that he's medically stable, those worries have been replaced by other worries, which are worries about his mental state. And, you know, if James makes any sort of improvement where his level of consciousness rises, the first thing he's going to become aware of is his situation. And for a young person, I just can't begin to imagine what that must feel like.
We do our best. We try and give them the best care we can, but it's not necessarily the care he needs.
With the injury that he has, he's totally dependent. So he needs basically 2 nursing staff to move him whenever they turn him and that sort of thing.
Nursing is a 24-hour job, but there are little things that need extra time, and sometimes we just don't have the time for it. Even just talking one-on-one with him sometimes. The only time we can do that is when we're attending to his hygiene, and you try to talk to him then, but it's really not enough time.
Unfortunately, James's injury is such that he will need lifelong support. Lifelong support is expensive, and we started to think about how we were going to fund that, and unfortunately we found out that James has an injury which is termed non-compensable.
We've got James, and we've got quite a few others who could do with the funding but aren't getting it.
James needs trained staff. He needs 2 people to move him, to turn him. He needs physiotherapy. He needs occupational therapy. He needs rehabilitation.
All those therapies that would benefit the residents, it's just not happening.
So the question is what to do about that. And as I was saying before, all this became very obvious to us after 3 or 4 days that we were in a bit of trouble. And luckily we have some very strong and thoughtful and creative friends, and we decided that to try to compensate in some way and to try and gain something positive out of what had happened, that would form a foundation. And so we formed the James Macready-Bryan Foundation, which has a number of goals. The first is to raise money to look after James and people like him. The second is to raise awareness in the community and to lobby government for change and to try to eliminate the term non-compensable from our vocabulary. And the third is to address the problem that we see that young people have with risk-taking behaviour, and to try and just make people a bit more aware that a split-second decision can have dire consequences, and just to get people to think a bit more, I suppose. We have had some awful statistics told to us recently that reveal the fact that if a young person goes into the city once a week on a Friday night for a year to go to nightclubs and things, there's about a 1 in 5 chance that they'll get beaten up, which is amazing, I think, and what's becoming of our society, really. I just can't understand it. What happened to James could happen to anybody.